Think about the last time a story genuinely terrified you. Like, really terrified you.
Yeah. Not just a cheap jump scare.
Yeah. Exactly. Not some loud crash on a movie screen where your heart rate spikes for like 3 seconds and then you just go back to eating your popcorn.
Right. You forget about it instantly.
Yeah, I'm talking about that bone-deep, suffocating dread. The kind that follows you out of the theater.
Or makes you afraid to turn off the bedside lamp when you finish a chapter.
Exactly. The kind of terror that makes you question the shadows in your own hallway.
I know exactly what you mean.
And usually when we talk about the iconic monsters of modern horror, the psychological thrillers, the haunted houses, the vampires, we have this comforting assumption.
What assumption?
Well, we assume these tropes just sort of magically appeared in the cultural consciousness, like they were handed down from the mountaintop by Bram Stoker in the 1890s, or, I don't know, perfected by Shirley Jackson in the 50s.
Right, like they arrived fully formed and ready to keep us awake at night.
Exactly. We like to think of literary history as this very clean, easily categorized timeline.
Oh, completely. It gives us a false sense of security, I think.
Yeah.
To look at something like Dracula or The Haunting of Hill House and just declare them the absolute genesis points of our nightmares.
We just put them in a neat little box.
Right. Human beings love to categorize our cultural history. We want to know exactly who enacted what and when, so we can put it on a shelf and feel like we understand it.
But the reality is never that neat, is it?
Not at all. The reality of literature is usually quite messy. It's full of, dead ends, overlooked pioneers, and forgotten architects.
Which is exactly what we're getting into today, because when you actually start digging into the literary research, that comforting timeline is just, well, it's completely shattered.
Oh, absolutely shattered.
You realize that almost everything we love and fear about modern horror was essentially invented by one person. And it wasn't some huge celebrity author either.
No, not at all.
It was a reclusive 19th century Irishman working completely alone in the dark.
It really is one of the greatest hidden lineages in all of literature. I mean, once you see the blueprints he drew up, it completely reframes the entire genre of suspense.
Which brings us to our mission. Welcome to the deep dive. And a massive welcome to you, the listener, our learner.
Yes.
You brought us a truly fascinating, massive stack of notes and literary research today, and we are going to use it to unpack the life, the innovations, and the legacy of Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu.
The forgotten architect of modern psychological horror.
Exactly. So, what exactly are we looking at in these sources today?
Well, looking through the incredible sources the learner provided, we have a really comprehensive roadmap. We're going to deconstruct his rather tragic, isolated biography first, which is just crucial context.
Right, you have to understand the man to understand the monsters.
Exactly. Then we'll explore his revolutionary shift away from external melodrama to deeply internal psychological terror. We'll dissect his major masterpieces like Carmilla and Uncle Silas.
Oh, I cannot wait to talk about Carmilla.
I know, it's so good. And we'll even touch on his sprawling novel, The House by the Churchyard. And finally, we'll trace how his specific literary DNA is woven into almost every Gothic writer who followed him.
But before we get into all the 19th century cobwebs, let's establish the stakes for the learner listening right now. Like, why should you care about a guy writing ghost stories in Dublin in the 1860s?
That is the perfect question to start with.
Right. Like, what is the practical application of this knowledge today?
Because understanding Le Fanu isn't just a dry exercise in academic history. It's a fundamental masterclass in how human perception works, and more importantly, how it fails.
How perception fails. I love that.
Yeah, it is about understanding how dread is constructed mechanically, piece by piece, inside the human brain. We are just endlessly fascinated by the things that terrify us from within.
So if you want to understand why your favorite psychological thriller works today, or why a certain movie gets under your skin, you have to look at Le Fanu.
Exactly. Or even why a toxic relationship feels so insidious. You have to understand the foundation he built. He codified the language of our modern anxieties long before we even had the vocabulary for them.
Man, that is a great framing. So let's dive right into the man in the shadows himself. Who was Joseph Thomas Sheridan Le Fanu?
Well, he was born in Dublin on August 28, 1814. And it's really important to understand that he did not come from obscurity or poverty.
Right. He wasn't some starving artist in an attic.
No, not initially. He was born into a highly regarded, intellectual Anglo-Irish family. His environment was steeped in literature, politics, theological debate.
So he had a huge head start. intellectually speaking.
Oh, absolutely. And from an early age, the sources highlight that he had this profound gift for storytelling. He was originally placed on a very respectable, secure track.
He went to Trinity College, right?
Yes, he attended Trinity College in Dublin, which was the elite institution at the time, to study law.
Okay, let's just pause on that for a second, because studying law in the early 19th century isn't just about getting a job, right?
No, not at all.
It is the ultimate secure, prestigious, socially bulletproof path for a young man in his position. It's all about the pursuit of order, evidence, and objective truth.
Which makes his departure from it all the more striking.
Yeah.
He abandoned his legal practice entirely. He just walked away from the courtroom to pursue journalism and writing.
Wow. That's a massive pivot.
It is. And he didn't just dabble as a freelancer either. He completely immersed himself in the publishing world. He eventually owned and edited the Dublin University magazine.
And based on the notes the learner provided here, that magazine wasn't just some niche local newsletter.
Oh no, it was huge.
It says it was one of the most culturally and politically important Irish literary journals of the entire 19th century. That is a massive platform.
Yes, and it became the primary vehicle for a lot of his own serialized fiction later on. So picture this guy. He is successful, he's powerful in the publishing world.
Right, he's actively engaged in the vibrant literary scene of Dublin.
Exactly. He is a man of the world, dealing in facts, deadlines, editorial oversight. But then there is this massive cataclysmic pivot in his life.
The defining tragedy.
Yes. In 1858, his wife Susanna passed away. And the sources make it very clear that her death didn't just cause him grief, it completely shattered his reality.
That is just awful.
It really is. The man who was a functioning, influential member of the literary elite basically evaporated. In his place, he transformed into a total recluse.
Like he just stopped going out.
Completely. He withdrew from society entirely, rarely leaving his Dublin townhouse. He altered his entire rhythm of life. He started working almost exclusively at night, literally surrounded by shadows.
Wow.
Yeah. He died in 1873 at the age of 58, but those final 15 years lived entirely in the dark, in isolation. They became the incubator for his greatest masterpieces.
The image of that is just so stark. I mean, a former journalist, someone whose entire career was based on observing the outside world, suddenly locking the door.
Refusing to look at anything but the inside of his own house.
Exactly. I'm trying to wrap my head around how that physical isolation actively reshaped his writing mechanics. It's like taking a photographer and locking them in a darkroom.
With no new subjects to shoot.
Right. Eventually, they're going to start developing whatever images are already stuck in their head. When you are completely cut off from society and you're awake while everyone else is asleep, your mind becomes the only source of entertainment.
But it also becomes the only source of your terror.
Yes. It operates like a sensory deprivation tank.
That analogy gets right to the core of his creative shift, actually. In a sensory deprivation tank, the brain is starved of external stimuli, right? So it begins to manufacture its own reality to fill the void.
Hallucinations start creeping in.
Exactly. But remember his background? He wasn't just a grieving man. He was a trained journalist and a rigorous editor.
Oh, that's a brilliant point.
So he took those formless, terrifying, grief-stricken hallucinations that bubbled up in the silence of his house, and he subjected them to editorial discipline. He gave the madness a structure.
But, I have to push back on this a little, or at least ask the question that seems to be lurking right beneath the surface here.
Sure, go ahead.
When we look at this shift, from public journalist to nocturnal recluse writing about psychological torment, was he making a calculated, savvy literary choice to invent a new genre?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. Or are we essentially reading the diary of a man whose mental state was actively deteriorating from unresolved grief? Is the horror an invention or a confession?
The ambiguity of that exact question is the defining genius of Le Fanu's work. We honestly cannot comfortably separate the two.
It's a bit of both.
Definitely. His grief undoubtedly provided the raw, agonizing emotional data. But his journalistic discipline provided the mechanism to deliver it to an audience without it just devolving into rambling.
That makes total sense. It wasn't just a diary of madness. It was a carefully constructed architecture of dread.
Exactly. He realized through his own lived experience that the terror he was feeling inside his isolated house, inside his own mind, was infinitely more potent.
And more inescapable than any generic monster stomping around a ruined castle.
Which brings us perfectly to the core thesis of his work, and really his greatest contribution to literature. He took the monster outside the house and he put it inside the mind.
He fundamentally redefined the mechanics of horror. I mean, we are talking about a massive evolutionary leap from chains to brains.
Genes to brains, I like that. To truly appreciate the magnitude of that leap, we have to look at what supernatural fiction looked like before Le Fanu got his hands on it.
Okay, set the scene for us. What were people reading before him?
Well, the early Gothic tradition, think of Horace Walpole or Anne Radcliffe, the pioneers of the late 18th and early 19th centuries. It was defined by pure external melodrama.
Melodrama in what sense exactly?
In the sense that the threat was always a massive spectacle, and it was always outside of the protagonist's own psyche. You had literal rattling chains, shrieking specters, massive crumbling Gothic castles.
So it was very theatrical.
The castles acted as this overwhelming theatrical backdrop. The horror was loud. The evil was super obvious. You had a clear villain, a clear victim, and the primary emotion was just shock.
So the threat was a literal physical force coming to get you.
Right.
It sounds kind of like the literary equivalent of a haunted house ride at a carnival. Like you sit in the cart, it moves you through the dark, a plastic skeleton pops out on a spring.
You scream, your heart rate jumps, and then you just move on to the next room.
Exactly. It's a series of disconnected external startle.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
It was a spectacle designed to elicit a physical gasp. But Le Fanu internalized the entire process. He stripped away the crumbling castles and the rattling chains.
He turned the volume down.
He really did. He took those loud ghosts and turned them into quiet instruments of psychological torment. He pioneered 3 specific narrative techniques that completely changed the game.
And the first one is probably his most famous, right? The unreliable narrator.
Yes, the unreliable narrator.
Now, I want to dig deep into this because an unreliable narrator has become such a buzzword in modern literature. But it isn't just someone who maliciously lies to the reader to hide a plot twist, right?
Oh, far from it. It's not just a cheap trick.
Right, so how does he use it?
In Le Fanu's hands, the unreliability is a symptom of a much deeper fracture. His first-person narrators are almost always fundamentally compromised from the very first page.
Compromised how?
By grief, by chronic illness, by extreme physical isolation, or even by the psychological toll of the very supernatural forces they're trying to describe to you.
Oh, wow. So they're just broken people trying to make sense of things.
Exactly. And as a reader, you were trapped in their perspective. But you were given just enough clues to know that you cannot fully trust the report you are reading.
That sounds exhausting in a good way.
It is. Le Fanu routinely refuses to confirm whether the haunting is an actual supernatural event occurring in the physical world, or simply the tragic projection of the narrator's deteriorating mind.
Okay, let's look at this from the reader's perspective, because I think a lot of people might actually find that kind of infuriating.
Oh, sure.
If I pick up a book that promises to be a ghost story, and I slowly realize the person telling me the story might just be hallucinating the whole thing because they have a fever, doesn't that break the contract with the reader?
I can see why you'd think that.
Right. Like, where are the stakes? If the ghost isn't real, if it might all just be a lie, why should I care if they escape?
That is a brilliant point of friction. But here's where Le Fanu flips the script. The unreliability isn't a trick that ruins the stakes. The unreliability is the puzzle that hooks you.
Okay, unpack that for me.
By making the narrator compromised, he transforms the story from a simple physical survival narrative into a profound mystery about the very nature of perception and reality.
Oh, I see.
The stakes are no longer just, will he survive the ghost? The stakes become, is reality itself breaking down? Can I trust my own senses?
That is a much deeper, more existential terror.
Exactly. You aren't just afraid for the character, you become afraid of the character's mind, which perfectly sets up his second major technique.
Which is atmospheric accumulation.
Yes.
It sounds like a meteorological term, honestly. But it perfectly describes the feeling of reading his work. What are the actual mechanics of that? How do you accumulate atmosphere?
You do it through the slow, agonizing build of dread over cheap spectacle. Instead of relying on set-piece shocks or sudden monstrous reveals, Le Fanu builds his terror through patience.
Just slow, relentless details.
Yes, the relentless accumulation of very small, almost mundane details. A shadow that seems slightly too long, a servant who looks away too quickly, a door that you were sure you left open, but is now closed.
The horror is always arriving.
Exactly. It is always just off stage, pressing in from the edges of the narrative, increasing the psychological pressure until the reader just feels trapped.
It's the difference between driving down a highway and suddenly seeing a car crash happen right in front of you versus driving on a road that you slowly realize is covered in black ice.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Right. The car crash is a sudden, terrifying explosion of violence. But the black ice, you aren't crashing yet. You are still moving forward. But your grip on the steering wheel tightens.
Every tiny slip of the tire spikes your adrenaline.
Exactly. You realize that catastrophe is inevitable and you have to sit there in the driver's seat waiting for it to happen. The anticipation is honestly worse than the event.
That is the exact mechanism. A sudden shock gives you a release of tension. The black ice denies you that release. It is suffocating.
It really is the dividing line in horror history.
If you trace the lineage of modern horror films, this technique is exactly that dividing line. Pre-Le Fanu horror is your classic jump scare slasher movies, Friday the 13th.
Right, you know there is a killer in the woods with a weapon, and you're just waiting for him to jump out of the closet.
Exactly. Post-Le Fanu horror is a modern A24 psychological thriller. Think about films like Hereditary or The Lighthouse. The dread is so thick and atmospheric you can practically choke on it.
Half the time, you aren't even watching a monster. You are just watching a human being slowly, inevitably lose their grip on reality under immense psychological pressure.
And that leads right into the third technique you mentioned, which weaponizes the one time we really can't control our perception.
Dreams as invasion.
Yes. Sleep is our most vulnerable state, you know. In Le Fanu's fiction, the boundary between sleeping and waking is dangerously permeable.
Because when we sleep, our rational defenses are totally lowered.
Exactly. The supernatural or the psychological fracture almost always enters through dreams in his stories. Characters will have horrific nightmares, but when they wake up, the elements of the nightmare have bled into the waking world.
So you can't trust being awake either.
Right. Eventually, his characters and the reader cannot be certain whether their current waking experiences are real or just a continuation of a hallucinatory state.
Which feeds right back into the unreliable narrator. I mean, if you lose the ability to differentiate your own memories of what happened when you were awake from what happened when you were asleep, you are completely untethered.
You are adrift.
And there is absolutely no better example of this total collapse of reality than his legendary short story, Green Tea.
Oh, Green Tea.
Let's get into the actual masterpieces here, because the notes the learner provided on this story are just wild.
Green Tea, published in 1869, is widely considered by scholars to be perhaps his finest short story. It is the absolute purest, most concentrated distillation of his entire methodology.
The setup is actually remarkably grounded. Right?
Very grounded. We are introduced to the Reverend Mr. Jennings. He is not a swashbuckling hero. He's not a tragic, brooding Gothic lord hiding a dark secret.
He's just a mild, studious clergyman.
Exactly. He's just an ordinary clergyman who is working on researching ancient religious texts. And to keep himself focused, he develops a habit of drinking strong green tea late at night while he works.
Which I have to say is an incredibly relatable starting point.
Oh, completely.
Anyone who has ever faced a deadline and resorted to late-night caffeine knows exactly what that state feels like. You are wired, you are exhausted, your eyes are burning.
And you reach a point of overstimulation where the silence of the house starts to feel incredibly loud.
It's the Victorian equivalent of doom scrolling at 3 a.m. with a cold cup of coffee.
That is exactly what it is.
Your brain is firing on all cylinders, but your body is exhausted.
And it is precisely in that vulnerable, overstimulated state that the invasion begins. Jennings begins to see something.
And it doesn't burst through the window, right?
No, it simply appears. A small black monkey. And here is the crucial detail. It is visible only to him.
Only to him. Wow.
At first, it is just a disturbing visual anomaly. But as the story progresses, and as his sleep is continually disrupted, the monkey grows progressively more malevolent.
It starts messing with his life.
Big time. It begins to interrupt his sermons. It starts telepathically urging him to do terrible, violent things. It becomes a constant, inescapable companion of pure malice.
I really want to focus on the choice of a monkey here. Like, why not a towering demon with horns? Why not a traditional ghost?
It's an interesting choice, right?
A small monkey is almost absurd, but that's what makes it so terrifying. It's not majestic. It's irritating, pervasive, and insidious.
Yes.
It feels exactly like an intrusive thought. It's small enough to just sit on your shoulder and whisper in your ear.
That is a brilliant observation, and it highlights the genius of the irresolution in Le Fanu's work.
Irresolution.
Yes. The central terror of green tea is that Le Fanu absolutely refuses to resolve the core diagnostic question.
Is the monkey real?
Exactly. Is the monkey a genuine supernatural entity? Is it a literal demon from hell sent to specifically torment a holy man and destroy his faith? Or is it entirely a symptom of complete mental collapse brought on by extreme isolation, obsessive overwork, and the chemical imbalance of too much green tea?
So he never gives you the answer key.
Never. The irresolution is precisely the point. By withholding the objective truth, Le Fanu traps the reader in the exact same state of agonizing uncertainty as the Reverend,
You're forced to weigh the evidence yourself.
constantly second-guessing your own interpretation of the text. It is a masterclass in sustained, inescapable dread.
But the way this story was presented to the public adds a whole other layer of brilliance to it. According to the research, green tea wasn't just published as a standalone spooky tale.
No, it wasn't.
It was part of a larger collection that introduced a really fascinating, highly calculated framing device.
Yes, green tea was collected in a landmark volume called In a Glass Darkly, which was published in 1872, right near the end of his life.
And the framing is so forward-thinking.
Incredibly forward-thinking, the 5 stories within the book are not presented as traditional fireside ghost stories told by an omniscient narrator.
Yeah.
Instead, they are presented as the posthumous case files of a Dr. Martin Hesselius.
A doctor. He frames supernatural horror as medical case studies.
Exactly. Dr. Hesselius is a German physician who specializes in what he terms metaphysical medicine.
Metaphysical medicine. I love that.
By using a medical professional to document the supernatural, Le Fanu is anticipating a very profound, very modern human urge. When we are faced with the unknown, with the terrifying and the irrational, our immediate, desperate instinct is to use science, logic, and categorization to control it.
We want to diagnose the horror.
We absolutely do.
We want the doctor to come in with an x-ray machine. We want them to point to a chart on the wall and say, look right here. This is the shadowy mass in the left ventricle causing the haunting. We can operate on Tuesday.
We crave the illusion of control. We want a prescription for the ghost.
Exactly.
And that is exactly the psychological comfort that Dr. Hesselius supposedly offers. It's a pseudoscientific framing.
It makes you feel safe.
It gives the reader this false sense of security, this illusion that the horror has been contained, studied, and diagnosed by an expert.
That's brilliant.
It's a structural trick that Bram Stoker would later borrow and use to massive global effect in Dracula with the character of Dr. Van Helsing.
Oh, wow. Van Helsing is totally the same archetype.
Van Helsing is the ultimate doctor trying to apply scientific methodology to a supernatural threat. But in Le Fanu's world, the doctor's files don't offer a cure.
They just meticulously document the inevitable destruction of the patient.
Exactly.
So that is how he handles short stories and curated collections. The doctor provides the frame. The narrator provides the unreliability. But the notes also mention his novels.
Yes, he wrote several.
And there is one specifically that seems to be a slight departure, but an important one, The House by the Churchyard. This was published in 1863.
That's right.
The notes describe it as a sprawling, Dublin-based novel that blends Gothic mystery with dark comedy that feels like whiplash compared to the suffocating dread of a demon monkey.
It does seem contradictory at first glance, but The House by the Churchyard is a vital piece of the puzzle to understanding his versatility.
How so?
Well, it is a massive, intricate tapestry of a novel set in the village of Chapelizod, just outside Dublin. It features a huge ensemble cast, murder, blackmail, hidden identities.
And dark, farcical comedy.
Yes, moments of genuine, dark, farcical comedy. But the comedy isn't there to lighten the mood in a traditional sense.
What's the function of it, then? If he's the master of dread, why make the reader laugh?
Because humor is the ultimate disarming mechanism. When you are constantly tense, you build up a resistance. You brace for the next scare.
Right, you get numb to it.
But if a writer can make you chuckle at the absurd social maneuverings of a minor character, your shoulders drop, your guard goes down.
Oh, that is devious.
It is precisely in that moment of relaxed vulnerability that Le Fanu strikes with something truly macabre or unsettling. The contrast makes the horror hit significantly harder.
It shows that he understood the psychological rhythm of his readers just as well as he understood the psychology of his characters.
He's playing the reader like an instrument.
Okay, so he can do the sprawling ensemble mystery. But let's look at what is widely considered his absolute masterpiece of long-form Gothic suspense, Uncle Silas.
Ah, Uncle Silas.
Yeah.
Published in 1864, this is his longest novel.
The basic setup here revolves around a young, extremely naive heiress named Maud Ruthven. After her father dies, the terms of his will dictate that she must be placed under the guardianship of her enigmatic, socially disgraced Uncle Silas.
Classic Gothic setup.
Right. Now, here's my fundamental question regarding the mechanics of this book. We talked about atmospheric accumulation, that feeling of a leaking gas pipe in a locked room.
Yes.
How on earth did he manage to sustain that intense claustrophobic pressure over an entire massive Victorian novel without the pacing just completely falling flat?
It's a huge challenge.
I mean, it is one thing to hold my breath for a 40-page short story about green tea, but a 500-page book?
It's a phenomenal structural achievement, and he accomplishes it by weaponizing the environment itself.
Weaponizing the environment.
Yes. Uncle Silas relies heavily on a foundational Gothic technique that Le Fanu perfected: the isolated household.
Okay, explain that.
In Le Fanu's work, the protagonists are almost always systematically stripped of their support networks and cut off from the wider rational world.
So they have no one to call for help.
Exactly. They are relocated to remote country estates, unfamiliar cities, or forced into social situations where they have absolutely zero trusted allies.
So isolation isn't just a setting, it's a tactic. They are literally trapped.
Physically and psychologically. In Uncle Silas, Maud is removed from the life she knew and placed in her uncle's decaying, sprawling estate, Bartram Haugh.
And I imagine the physical isolation of the house amplifies her psychological vulnerability.
To a fever pitch.
Right.
But the true genius is the untrustworthy nature of the household itself.
It's not just the house, it's the people in it.
Right. Every shatter in the corridor, every locked door, every whispered, half-heard conversation between the strange servants becomes a source of acute terror.
Because Maud cannot be certain who is working for her, who is working against her, or what Silas's true intentions are.
Exactly.
It's like checking into a massive, beautiful Airbnb out in the woods, and over the course of 3 days, you slowly start noticing weird things.
Like what?
Like a chair is moved. The host asks a question that implies they've been listening to you. And then you try to leave, and you realize the deadbolts on the doors all lock from the outside.
That is terrifying.
You are technically a guest, but the reality is you are a prisoner.
The realization of captivity is the engine of the novel. The dread is cumulative. It's a slow, agonizing realization for Maud that the people who are legally obligated to protect her are actually orchestrating her demise.
You mentioned the untrustworthy family dynamic, the idea that the threat comes from someone who is supposed to be a guardian.
Yes.
But Le Fanu's most famous work, the one that truly echoes through time, weaponized something even more terrifying than a creepy, scheming uncle.
It really did.
He weaponized intimacy, he weaponized affection itself. Which brings us, finally, to Carmilla.
Carmilla is a monumental text in the history of literature. It was published in 1872, the year before his death, and it was also collected as part of the In a Glass Darkly case files.
And it's a vampire novella, right?
Yeah. Yes. It is a vampire novella that predates Bram Stoker's Dracula by 25 years. And frankly, if we look at the psychological mechanics at play, in many respects, it is far more sophisticated than Stoker's work.
Wow. That is a massive statement to make. More sophisticated than Dracula, the undisputed king of vampire fiction? How do you justify that?
I justify it by looking at how the horror operates. Dracula relies heavily on external action.
Chases across Europe, wolf attacks, invasions.
Exactly. The Count is a conqueror. But the horror in Carmilla operates on a much more intimate, insidious, and deeply psychological level.
Tell us the setup.
The story follows a young woman named Laura who lives a very sheltered life in an isolated castle with her father. One evening, a carriage accident occurs right outside their home.
Convenient accident.
Very. A mysterious, aristocratic young woman named Carmilla is seemingly injured, and her mother begs Laura's father to take the girl in while she recovers.
They literally open the door. The monster doesn't have to scale the walls or break a window. They carry her in and offer her a bed.
Precisely. She becomes the ultimate welcomed house guest. And almost immediately, Carmilla develops an intense magnetic fascination with Laura.
And this isn't your typical vampire attack, is it?
No, the vampire's predation in this story is coded entirely differently than anything the Victorian audience had seen before. It is not an act of sudden violence.
It's slower.
It is intimate, it is deeply seductive, it acts in every meaningful structural way as a grooming relationship.
Okay, we need to unpack this grooming aspect because it feels so incredibly, disturbingly modern.
It is shockingly modern.
When we talk about modern anxieties regarding online grooming or falling into a toxic, abusive relationship, The common denominator is that the villain almost never arrives waving a red flag or holding a weapon.
Right, they never announce their intentions.
They arrive offering exactly what you need. They arrive with a listening ear, a shoulder to cry on, and they make the victim feel incredibly special, chosen, and seen.
They isolate the victim from their other relationships not by force, but by demanding exclusivity through affection.
That is exactly the dynamic Le Fanu captured over a century ago.
We can call it predatory intimacy. The true chilling horror of Carmilla isn't the physical act of blood-sucking.
Right, if you focus only on the vampire lore, you miss the point entirely.
Exactly. The horror is the profound betrayal of trust. Comfort strictly precedes the revelation of danger. Carmilla acts as a confidant, a sister, a lover, and a protector to Laura.
And Laura just slowly realizes what's happening.
Laura's slow, agonizing, confusing awareness of what is actually happening to her, the creeping realization that this beautiful person she deeply cares for, who claims to love her, is systematically draining her life away every single night.
That constitutes the novel's central terror.
It really does.
It is absolutely revolutionary that a Victorian writer in the 1870s was coding a lethal monster's threat as an intimate, seductive relationship between two young women. The subtext is basically text.
That is light years ahead of its time. It is astounding. And if you look at the notes the learner provided regarding the Jeweltown universe themes,
Oh, yeah.
which is a broader literary framework for analyzing power dynamics in supernatural fiction, this exact dynamic is highlighted as a foundational concept.
The core of this dynamic is the victim welcoming their destroyer.
Exactly. It is the tragedy of the victim perceiving a lethal, parasitic threat as a form of protection or deep affection.
The moment you begin to love the thing that is destroying you, that is the exact moment the trap snaps shut. You can't fight back, because fighting back feels like betraying someone you love.
Exactly. It completely upends the classic external good versus evil narrative. The evil isn't a demon you can strike with a sword. The evil is wearing a mask of love.
It is one of Le Fanu's greatest, most psychologically devastating contributions to the horror tradition.
Without a doubt.
What's fascinating to me as I look at these sources is that he didn't just limit this brilliant concept, this idea of an unwanted relationship or a slow, creeping claim over a person's soul, to vampires or human villains.
No, he didn't.
He actually applied this exact same psychological weight to inanimate objects.
Yes. His approach to the haunted object is incredibly unique, and it perfectly mirrors his approach to vampires and psychological ghosts. Look at a story like Squire Toby's Will, which is referenced in the notes.
How does he handle objects differently?
Well, in traditional standard-issue horror, a haunted object usually carries a very simple transactional curse.
Right, like the classic curse Marky's paw or a cursed idol in an adventure movie. You touch the idol, you get bad luck, you make a wish, something ironic and bad happens, boom.
The mechanics are simple cause and effect. But Le Fanu rejected simple mechanics.
What did he do instead?
In his lore, objects do not just carry a curse. They carry a relationship. They carry specific, targeted, malevolent intent across time.
Like they have a grudge.
Exactly. The object acts as a physical bridge, binding the living to the dead through cycles of possession and obsessive behavior.
So it's not just a spooky necklace or a haunted painting that makes the room cold. The object represents a literal claim upon the living.
A claim that the living person didn't choose.
Right, didn't ask for and cannot easily refuse because it is tied to their lineage or their property.
Exactly. It reflects a very deep, very Gothic anxiety about the past, refusing to stay buried. In Le Fanu's worldview, the living are held hostage by the debts, the malice, the sins, or the unresolved business of their dead ancestors.
That is heavy.
The physical artifact, the will, the portrait, the inherited ring, is just the anchor holding that toxic relationship in place.
I love that analogy. It's like inheriting a toxic family legacy, but physicalized.
Precisely.
Imagine literally inheriting a massive amount of financial debt from a parent you never even liked, and realizing that their bad choices are now legally your responsibility.
It's a nightmare.
It's the crushing weight of history forcing you into a relationship with ghosts you never wanted to meet. You are trapped by the past simply by existing in the present.
It adds a profound philosophical weight to what could otherwise be a simple ghost story. He makes the supernatural represent the inescapable burdens of history and familial duty. The ghosts aren't just scary, they are obligations.
I want to just pause for a second and reflect on how incredibly, shockingly modern all of these techniques feel. I mean, we're talking about an Irish guy writing by gaslight in the 1860s and 70s.
It's hard to believe sometimes.
And yet, we've just discussed the mechanics of psychological vampires, the insidious nature of grooming, the modern anxiety of late-night caffeine-induced doom scrolling, the crushing reality of inherited family trauma, and the complete collapse of objective reality through unreliable narrators.
He is speaking directly to 21st century anxieties.
Which leads us perfectly into examining just how far Le Fanu's shadow stretches over the literature that came after him. Let's talk about the unseen architect and his legacy.
The legacy section of the sources provided is essentially a who's who of horror royalty. His direct, measurable influence is staggering, beginning most obviously with Bram Stoker.
You mentioned Stoker earlier.
Yes. We mentioned that Stoker, who was also an Irishman, heavily involved in the Dublin literary scene shortly after Le Fanu, almost certainly knew Carmilla intimately before he ever wrote a word of Dracula.
You said Carmilla was a dry run for Dracula. If you put the two texts side by side, the structural similarities are impossible to ignore.
They are foundational. First, you have the epistolary framing, the technique of telling the story through a curated collection of letters, journals, and medical documents.
Which Stoker uses to build Dracula, mirroring Dr. Hecelius's pace files.
Exactly.
Huh.
You have the aristocratic, charming, old-world vampire infiltrating a modern, rational society. You have the specific dynamic of the young female victim who initially welcomes her attacker and mistakes the predation for a trance-like state of affection.
It's all there.
The sources heavily suggest that Le Fanu built the prototype. He worked out all the engineering bugs of the psychological vampire story, and Stoker took that blueprint and mass-produced it into a global phenomenon.
But his influence goes way beyond just the vampire mythos, right? What about the ghost story itself?
If you want to talk about the 20th century ghost story, you have to talk about M.R. James. For many scholars, James effectively defined the antiquarian ghost story genre for the modern era.
And he was a fan.
A huge fan. M.R. James explicitly and frequently credited Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu as his primary literary ancestor. James reportedly kept Le Fanu's collected works right on his desk while he wrote.
No way!
Yes. He admired him so much that even tracked down Le Fanu's forgotten stories and wrote a glowing biographical introduction to a 1923 edition of his work, bringing him back to the public's attention.
So the guy who is widely credited with inventing the modern ghost story literally had Le Fanu's books open on his desk, copying his homework while he was doing it.
Essentially, yes. James absorbed everything. The slow, atmospheric build, the dusty antiquarian settings, the doomed academics, and most importantly, the technique of letting the supernatural remain just ambiguous enough to deny the reader any easy comfort at the end of the tale.
And it didn't stop in the 1920s, did it?
Not at all. If you look at the pioneers of early weird fiction, writers like Algernon Blackwood and Arthur Machen, who bridged the gap between Gothic ghosts and cosmic horror,
They all drew from him, too.
they all worked fundamentally in the psychological tradition that Le Fanu established. They embraced his core idea that the most frightening supernatural fiction operates on the mind rather than the body.
That horror is fundamentally about perception, isolation, and the terrifying failure of human reason when faced with the unknown.
He really is like the Velvet Underground of horror literature.
Oh, I love that analogy.
Right. There's that famous quote about the band The Velvet Underground that only 10,000 people bought their first album, but every single one of those 10,000 people went out and started a band.
That is so true. Le Fanu might not be the biggest household name today. He isn't Stephen King. You won't find a dedicated section for him at the airport bookstore.
But everyone who read him went on to invent the modern genres we consume constantly. Look at the contemporary list. Shirley Jackson, Susan Hill, Sarah Waters.
Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House is arguably the greatest haunted house novel ever written in the English language.
And it owes its entire literary DNA, its entire atmospheric structure, to Le Fanu. Jackson perfected the very thing Le Fanu started in his dark Dublin townhouse.
The idea that the human mind is the ultimate haunted house.
If you cannot trust your own perceptions, if your own brain is weaponized against you, you don't need a ghost rattling chains in the hallway to terrify you. You are already trapped in the most inescapable prison imaginable.
So for you, the learner listening right now, if you are suddenly realizing that you have a massive gap in your literary history and you need to read this guy immediately, the sources have provided a very specific, curated, recommended reading order.
Yes, they have.
If someone wants to experience this creeping dread for themselves, where should they start?
The absolute best entry point is the short story Green Tea. As we discussed, it is the purest, most concentrated distillation of his method. It will teach you how to read his specific brand of ambiguity.
Okay, green tea first. Then what?
From there, move to Carmilla, which is his most famous and accessible long work. It's a quick, devastating read. Once you've read those two, tackle the entire In a Glass Darkly collection.
To get the full Dr. Hesselius experience.
Exactly, and see how he frames horror as a medical inevitability.
And then, when you're ready for the heavy lifting.
Then you sit down with Uncle Silas. It is his finest novel, a sustained masterclass in Gothic dread and claustrophobia.
And finally, you can explore the Dover edition of his best ghost stories to catch his other shorter works and antiquarian tales.
The absolute best part for a modern reader is that because these were written in the 19th century, all of his major works are in the public domain. You can find them freely available online right now.
And there are excellent atmospheric audiobook recordings out there as well.
Definitely check those out.
I highly recommend making yourself a cup of green tea tonight, turning off all the overhead lights, and starting with Reverend Jennings and his terrible little monkey.
Just maybe don't drink the tea too late.
Or if you do, maybe don't look too closely at the shadows in the corner of your office.
Excellent advice. The shadows in a Le Fanu story rarely stay where they belong.
We have covered so much ground today. To summarize this incredible journey for our learner, we started with a grieving man, a former journalist isolated in a dark house in Dublin, who took his own agonizing psychological pain and used it to fundamentally rewrite the rules of fiction.
He took the ghosts out of the crumbling medieval castles, and he put them into our living rooms, into our late-night cups of tea, and into the fragile architecture of our own minds.
He is the forgotten father of the psychological ghost story. He is the man who taught us that the scariest monsters aren't the ones that violently break down the door. They are the ones we smile at, offer a seat, and willingly invite inside.
He proved, permanently, that horror isn't about the physical strength of the monster. It is entirely about the vulnerability of the human mind.
Which leaves us with a rather unsettling final thought, perfectly aligned with Le Fanu's core philosophy.
If Le Fanu's greatest, most enduring terror comes from the sudden, chilling realization that we cannot actually trust our own senses, and that our own minds possess the power to project our deepest, unspoken fears into our waking lives.
Take a moment to look around the room you're in right now. Look at the walls, the doors, the quality of the light.
How certain are you, truly, that the reality you are currently experiencing isn't just your own perfectly constructed, slow-burn illusion?
That imaginary X-ray machine is definitely broken, Doctor. Thank you to our listener, the learner, for bringing this incredible stack of sources for today's deep dive. We hope you have a great day and maybe a slightly restless night.